And hi, Miles. How are you doing? Okay, well, I'm just gonna continue with the discussion of healing active imagination, and this is as we go through this, you're gonna find it is incredibly profound. Especially if we take seriously what the inner figure says, listen to it, and try to understand what they say, and uh, then to respond with our human response. I mean, we hear this voice. I mean, Barbara Hannah was told by her soul, "Your world is as mysterious to us as our world is to yours." So when we're hearing this voice from this other realm, which is really outside of time and space, it is incredibly wise. And what James Hillman said about dreams: don't worry if you don't understand the dream understands you. So these figures understand us, because they are not outside us, they are inside us, and they have been with us since we were first born. And and they are really the voice within us of the flower that's unfolding. I mean, they're really the voice of the rhizome within us, which we can call fate, but it's really not fate. It is, you could say, why is an acorn fated to be an oak tree? Well, that's because that's the root of the oak tree. But anyway, I thought, before we went in there, now Anna Marjula is a person with a negative father complex. So she has a very negative animus, and her trying to overcome her negative animus is a real struggle for her. But I thought you might want to see the opposite of that. This is a woman who had the exact opposite problem. She had a negative mother complex, and her animus was extremely positive. In fact, it was a little bit too positive. But I thought I'd show you this. She had in one of her visions or active imaginations, she saw. Now, this is not Anna Marjula. This is the woman with the positive animus and the negative mother complex. Okay, just a second here. Okay, Tim is here. Okay, let's see. Hi, Tim. Hi, Tim. I was just saying that.
Hello.
Oh, Tim, I can hear you.
Good.
Hi. Yeah. Well, I was just saying, just before we start in, and what I thought we'd do this time is we're just going to go through the active imagination dialogues, and then I'll kind of fill in the middle with just a summary of what happened. So, because really, if you go line by line through what the Great Mother and the Animus says, I mean, I just have never read anything more profound. And if and it also, the other aspect of it that I gleaned from it was to really understand what these inner figures are saying. And as I was telling Miles, as James Hillman said, don't worry that you don't understand the dream, because the dream understands you. I mean, these inner figures are the representatives of our rhizome, or our root from which we grow. Okay. So they are the voice of that, and the voice of this unfolding. And so So their outline of what is good and what is bad, and what is productive and what is unproductive, is considerably different than what ego consciousness thinks. So and what I find in this active imagination, and I find in my own active imaginations, is that this voice is always a shock to the system. It's so incredibly shocking. But what I was going to show, go ahead,
Carry
Tim.
on. I can't get my camera to work, but carry on.
Okay, sure. Well, anyway, what I was going to show first is, since Anna Marjula is a very unique woman, she has such a negative father complex, and we're going to learn later why, because her father really regressed after the mother died at 13. So he, we'll go. It was, he had a difficult relationship with his daughters. Let's put it that way. And somebody, I think Barbara Hannah said he was that close from being in prison. But I don't think he went all the way. But anyway, what I was going to show is just the exact opposite of this. This is a woman with a extremely positive mother or animus, and a very negative mother complex. So she's dealing with the same issues, that she was an unmarried woman who never had any children, so she was feeling this thing. But she had this vision one time of this analyst that she was speaking with, and he was waiting for a revelation. And this is in a dream, okay? And so unbeknownst to him, she has this 5-diamond brooch, and she reflects it in the sun so that the sun goes on his eyes. He thinks that's God, but it's her, and so she's kind of realizing how shallow her relationship with the animus, or the analyst, or the animus is, and the fact that she's is manipulating her analyst to some extent, and she's not taking seriously her the spiritual process. Okay, but then right after that, she has another dream of a man who is clad completely in tree bark. Now, okay, so he's this representative of the rooted world, and you're not going to fool this guy, and he tells her this: I cannot explain what I'm going to show you, but I can show it to you, and anyway, so she drew these two trees that represented the two aspects of it. Here's the first tree. Now look at this tree. I mean, it is a tree with roots and branches. Okay, no leaves. Yet there are hands pulling it down and birds pulling it up. So there's this tension that is evolved in this, that is working against the center. Okay. Now, then she had this other picture that she did. Let's see, which is this one. Okay. All right, let's see. Yeah. Okay, now see, this one is the comfortable tree. The first one was the uncomfortable tree. Okay, now this one, it has leaves. There's the bird is in the top, but he's resting. He's not pulling up. The roots are more going in, and then there is the woman, her, sitting at the base of the tree. So, I mean, now this is very similar to one other thing that she drew, which was also an aspect in one of her dreams. Is this was this is, remember, she's a person with a very positive animus and a very negative mother complex. So then she had this dream. So she has the ring of the center, or the ring of the self, and it's being pulled in 4 directions from the outside by chains, which she didn't know where the chains were going, but anyway, they were there, and then she had this, sort of countervailing dream. And this is the jewel between man and woman. Okay. Now look at, it's got the same radiating going out as the metal ring with the chains that pulled out. But instead of the center being pulled from the outside, it's now radiating from within out to eros and to logos. Now, the eros is the living breath of the earth, and the logos is the living breath of heaven. At least this is what the Taoists call it. So the inner rays are informing both the living breath of the earth and informing the living breath of heaven. And so this is the more balanced aspect. This is kind of the anticipatory as drawing, and the first 2 drawings were sort of telling us what's going on now. The second drawings were the anticipatory drawings, or where the active imagination is leading towards.
So you said the feminine energy is eros?
Yes, the feminine energy is eros, and
drawing the person toward the earth.
Yeah, it's the living breath of the earth. It's the living.
What's the other one?
The logos is the living breath of heaven. And the idea here is this is going to be somewhat of a contrast between Anna Marjula's problem, where this woman had a problem with the and by the way, this is from the book called The Living Symbol by Gerhard Adler, who is a translator of Jung, who's a very good friend of Jung. And Edward Edinger says this is one of the best books he's ever read, So, I mean, because it's got hundreds of dreams in it and hundreds of dream drawings in it. But I just thought I'd start out with that, and then we'll get into the active imaginations here. And let's see, we'll just start with the one that we ended with last time, which we really didn't discuss.
I'll just comment on that image.
Yeah, jump in, man.
It really depicts a balance of energy, the masculine energy being in balance with the feminine energy, and the earth, I would imagine, is the center ring.
The wisdom of the earth.
The wisdom of the earth is in harmony and in balance and equilibrium. And what we have today in our society is an imbalance, I perceive, an imbalance of the masculine energy versus the feminine energy.
Yeah, go ahead. Go finish your thought. I'm sorry.
And I have an article from the American Psychological Association from 2005. And it says, men and women, no big difference.
Uh-oh.
And I'm thinking, there is a big difference. Now, I'm saying, their article, I think, was trying to address the bias against women from going into the STEM fields. And STEM, what does that stand for again?
It's
technical and engineering and
okay.
Science, technical, engineering, and mathematics. I think that's it. STEM. So at Google, there was a fellow at Google got into trouble for saying, the reason there's more men at Google, he said, is because we have, as Jordan Peterson says, different innate, on average, I'm talking in generalizations, different, what's the word, affinities, or where, men are attracted to typically some differences, different fields of study.
I would say typologically. It's a typological problem.
Right. So to summarize, just so I just complete the thought, I think indeed men are more inclined to ideas and things, and women are more inclined to relationships and aesthetics.
You nailed it, man.
Well, and I'm just quoting other people, of course.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
we've got these machines that are really kind of like destroying the planet. And I just watched what a real dairy operation looks like. Like, this was shocking. I don't know where this photo was taken, but this is just some massive dairy operation. And the cows are all just used and abused to create milk and cheese. And I'm talking, in one operation, there must have been tens of thousands of cows. And, they're all getting milked, and the babies are stolen from them when they're born. And, the feminine aspect of it is that these cows still have an innate mother-baby bond, right? And so, I don't know, personally, I think if we were to analyze who came up with this machine, this massive machine of a dairy operation, how much was it of the male brain that came up with this design versus the female brain? Anyway, so there you have it. I'll shut up for now.
Well, it's really is something I really did want to bring up, is when we're talking about eros and logos and women and men. The problem, I think right now, one of the issues is the over valuation that we give to the thinking function, and then secondarily to the sensation function. We overweight the thinking function above the feeling function and the intuition function, the intuitive. So when we are totally, ignoring the feeling function, there's 4 functions, 2 rational ones, thinking and feeling, and then 2 ones that just happen to us, intuition and sensation. Men tend to be thinking sensates or sensate thinkers, and usually extroverted, where women tend to be intuitive feelers, also extroverted, But just as if you looked at the percentages, Myers-Briggs has done that. I don't know whether that's been all disproven by now, but it used to be when they'd look at college students and they would run types, women tended to be feeling intuitive and men tended to be thinking sensates. But the problem with the man, this idea is it's shaping our society. It's shaping our thinking. It's shaping what is valued by people, rather than valuing imagine a society where thinking and thinking, at least, was devalued. No, we don't want this deliberate thinking thing. We want this indirect, imaginative, connected with the unconscious and with the poetry and the art of the muse. And so your thinking function is not wanted here.
Can I jump in here?
Yes.
What you're describing sounds to me like how I experienced Native American culture, that they are very much plugged into the feminine
feeling intuition.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as Miles was talking, I was thinking about this bizarre tendency I've noticed around the world. If you look at old industrial buildings from the 19th century, they are often, in this part of the world, they're built of brick, and they are, like I'm talking about, warehouses and power stations and any kind of industrial architecture. There are curved windows, and there's entablature around the cornices of the buildings. These are functional, cheap buildings thrown up, but they always include some aspect of beauty.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
In the 20th century, we got into total functionalism. All aesthetics went out the window, and now we build the
sheet metal.
Yeah, the absolute cheapest buildings we can, and if they only last 40 years, who cares?
Utilitarian. It's totally, square, rectangular.
Right.
Let's get this done, and go, do whatever we do after work. It's this bedroom. I live in what's called a bedroom city, where people just go to work and then come home. I mean, it's kind of a little bit strange, but this is just a very important part of really getting a grip on what the total totality of this universe that we live in. That there is that we are devaluing the earth, the nature, and the feeling and the intuitive functions over the economic thinking, and they're much more valued. I mean, these are the things where you get paid a lot of money. This is what you want your kid to grow up as, and it's anybody that doesn't fit into that is a loser, But anyway, you can imagine a society that said the thinking person was the loser and not the intuitive feeler. You could imagine what a society like that would be, but we don't have that. But anyway, I thought I'd jump right into to the Great Mother. Now, as I mentioned, this is incredibly profound as we go through this. I mean, it's very impressive to me. I don't know if it is to anybody else, but I just thought we'd start off where we left off last time. Let's see if I got it right here. I think this is the one. Okay. Yeah, this is the first conversation with the Great Mother. And does somebody want to read that real quick, and we'll just discuss it in a little more detail than we did just going wow last time. Do you want to try it, Miles?
Sure.
You're both good readers, by the way.
Okay, thank you. So, first conversation with the Great Mother. Patient. My Great Mother, I want to approach you and to speak to you, but I do not see you very clearly. You are as if under a veil. When I try to remove that veil from you, it then envelopes the Animus and makes him invisible to me, which seems dangerous. Why is this? Great Mother, presumably the Animus threw his veil on me the day on which he was unmasked by your analyst. He did this because he has power over you when I remain invisible. Speak with me in spite of my being veiled, and meanwhile, keep an eye on him. Patient, can you help me to educate him? Great Mother, we must educate you first. He will follow. Patient, I have inferiority feelings because I am an unmarried woman. I terribly want to make up for my unlived life still. Great Mother, in reality, it is thus. All life is lived. You lived your neurosis. In the meanwhile, I lived by proxy the life that was concealed behind your neurosis. You did not know this, and therefore you feel as if you had missed your life. But your life is lived by me. Nothing can fall totally out of the psyche. As soon as you are mature enough to receive your treasure, I shall give it to you. Neurosis is always smaller than that which is hidden behind it. You could not stand that hidden thing and you repressed it, but you strengthened your courage while passively bearing your neurosis for years and years. Compare this to a pair of scales. When courage and strength are gathered and thrown into one of the scales, shall we say into the passive scale, then the other one, the active scale, can rise. Then you can seize the sum of your unlived life that I lived provisionally for you. Nothing is lost, all of it is there. Try to take it bit by bit. In this way, you will still be able to mature as a woman with a fulfilled life. Patient, but how can I ever be a woman with a fulfilled life if I...
All right, just a second, and I'll get the next one here. I'm sorry, I don't know how else to do this, but, you know, there we go. Okay, start with the patient. Yeah.
But how can I ever be a woman with a fulfilled life if I have not got a normally functioning sexuality? Great Mother, it is not the sexual function that you should be your starting point, but the feelings that possibly can lead in that direction, and for which the sexual function might in the end be an expression. Patient, how can I regain those feelings? I lost them long ago. Great Mother, you repressed them. They can be exchanged for courage. Patient, you mention courage all the time. I believe courage was not the thing I lacked. Great Mother, you certainly have courage, but a dangerous kind. Your animus plays with your courage, and as you are an animus possessed and cannot stand his power, so your courage becomes too passive. Your animus likes to push you into psychic misery. This misery you suffer courageously, very courageously, but only because you see it in it an opportunity to feel yourself a heroine. This is your compensation for neurotic inferiority sensations. This kind of courage does not function in the right way. It is too passive. Patient, the animus is to blame. Great Mother, yes, but ultimately it is you who are responsible for your animus. In younger years, you were far too high up. Therefore, your neurosis was necessary. Now you should not hate shadow and animus so bitterly. Their play with you was monstrous, but necessary. You brought it about yourself by not being in any way conscious of the dark forces in you. Patient, I feel ashamed. Great Mother, feel responsible. That should be the way to activate your courage.
Yes, no, that is, that's the first conversation that she had with anyone other than her animus. And it followed her analyst unmasking the animus in regards to her telling, Anna Marjula telling her analyst, who was Emma Young, that told her of her great vision, which was basically, you know, that she was to produce the genius child, but the only way that she could do it was through conceiving the child with a man, but without any sexual pleasure or any lust, you know. And the Emma Young told her, well, that's totally animus opinion. There is nothing feminine in that at all. So that was the unmasking of the animus, that she thought this was this great vision that God had sent her, you know, and she spent her whole life, you know, trying to fulfill this vision, which then she suddenly finds out is not coming from God. It's coming from a devil, a masculine devil that lives inside of her. And Emma Young describes this aspect of the animus. She says, if the possibility of spiritual functioning is not taken up by the conscious mind, the psychic energy intended for it falls into the unconscious and there activates the archetype of the animus. Okay, this was because she was not activating her spiritual life. And she says something very haunting later in the act of imagining. I don't know if we'll get to it today, but she says that she always felt guilty because men didn't like her, because she panicked when she met them. And she felt guilty because normal women didn't have that problem. But she says, I never felt guilty because I was not a spiritual person. I mean, she's so honest here. And I mean, you're going to find this is what really strikes me and as a lesson in active imagination is you listen to what the inner voice says. If you're doing just this written dialogue, you know, what they call automatic writing, but in other words, you state a statement and then as trying to be Tim Holmes painting with the marine boots outside the door, you try to do an undirected answer to the statement, and then you read it and you try to comprehend it, and then you give an answer that is your human answer. If someone had told you this, you know. But anyway, she says that possessed of the energy that flowed back in the unconscious, the animus figure becomes autonomous, so powerful indeed that it can overwhelm the conscious ego and thus fully dominate the whole personality. I must add here that I start with the view that in the human being, there's a certain basic idea to be fulfilled, which is the rhizome. You know, we are an acorn, but we're a special acorn. We're a Miles acorn, or a Tim acorn, and a Craig acorn. You know, but that there's this basic idea to be fulfilled, just as, for instance, in an egg or a seed corn, there is already contained in the idea, contained the idea of the life destined to come for it. And then she just adds this little bit about the animus is not an image and it's not experience, but it's an entity that is not organically coordinated in its activity with our other psychic functions. It behaves as a law unto itself, and it interferes with the life of the individual as if it were an alien element. Sometimes the interference is helpful, sometimes disturbing, if not actually destructive. And she tells you why it's destructive is because the possibility of living out the rhizome, this idea that you were born with, and you're not living with it, and you're instead living the ego life. You're giving the energy that should go into living out the rhizome to these independent, inner, autonomous figures within you, which are real and are conscious. It says, in fact, I had a dream last night that said that very thing, you know, and it's the second time I've heard it. We are real, you know, we are real. Just keep that in mind. And you know, I've had the animus tell me too, what would your life be without me? And she said something else the other day. She said, how long do you guys think you can go on this route? I mean, she's just saying that how long can you keep inertia without integrating me into your developing of your rhizome? Because I am the energy that develops the rhizome. But anyway, she says that when you're dealing with the animus, you're dealing with an absolute, immutable, and that means unchanging, entity, but you're also dealing with spiritual process. So you see, there's these two aspects that Anna Marjula is dealing with. One is living out her fate or her rhizome or whatever you want to call it. And since she's not, and since she's resisting it, her animus has become all powerful in her existence. Not only her animus, but her shadow and her animus, that they have married in the unconscious, and they're both working against her. And this is because really of the inability to surrender her because of somewhat of an inflation of the ego, but there's a lot involved in it. It's not that simple. But anyway,
just before you go on, it's coming to mind the passages in the Bible about how there's different kinds of soil. There's rocky soil and there's rich soil, and the metaphor that you have of the acorn, and talking about an acorn becoming a particular tree, and we're all unique. In a sense, I'm sort of thinking of how the soil is, they're deficient in certain nutrients and needs a little bit of assistance. And can we stretch this into saying that the soil that she has been in was deficient in some nutrients, and it was overly almost toxic with the animus nutrient, and
well, yeah,
I mean, talk about that, because I know you're familiar with those passages too.
Yes, well, you're familiar with "if thou wouldst moisten this dry earth," but I've also had the same dreams as this woman that Gerhard Adler was dealing with, is of neglected animals. There is you open up the basement door, and here's a dog coming up, all emaciated and skinny, that you haven't seen him for 20 years. Well, it was because he was locked in the basement. Okay. And what was the problem was that he wasn't your instinctive life, your life of living in harmony with your nature. I mean, you've got body, soul, and spirit, and all three of them need to be nourished. And if you're not nourishing the body aspect, you're really overvaluing the thinking side. If you are equally weighting feeling and intuition along with thinking, the body is a little more important to you. Especially, I mean, if you have all four functions balanced, it's a little bit easier to have in balance your body, spirit, and soul. But the problem is that the dog is not emaciated. Your soil is, the dog is emaciated. It's not getting its nutrition. That's what Jung said. The Lord's Prayer really says, "Give us this day our spiritual nutrients, our spiritual food." That isn't "give us this day our daily bread." It's "give us this day our spiritual food." And so every day, and he tells people that you need to feed your soul every day. And he says, people just laugh in my face. Are you kidding? I mean, I'm going to check my stock account and, read the newspaper and see what the sports are. I don't have time for that. But anyway, so we'll just quickly go through this. I think it's the first conversation with the Great Mother. Okay, she's veiled by the Animus, the Great Mother is. And even when she removes it, the veil, now the Animus is invisible. And she says, that's dangerous, because we find out later the Animus and the devil are one. Now, only in her case. And at a point later, we're going to see the devil. She actually sees the devil leave the Animus and go up to heaven, where he belongs. There's supposed to be 4 people in heaven, and he belongs. That's at least what her Great Mother is, or her visionary life is telling her. That this devil is part of God and needs to be in heaven with him. So anyway, the Great Mother then says, the veil was put on me by the Animus the day that he was unmasked as your tormentor, the great vision, and the animus only has power over me, the great mother, when I am veiled. And she says, but speak to me anyway, even if I am veiled, and I'll keep an eye on the animus, she tells him. Now, isn't this wonderful? I mean, and I'll tell you something. Everything we're hearing, all the themes we're hearing here. Oh, wait a second. Charles is here. Okay. Hi, Charles. How you doing? Can you hear? Okay, well, we're just getting into just started the first conversation with the Great Mother, so you haven't really missed anything. That's what.
Okay, good.
That's what. One time Yogi Berra's wife goes to a baseball game, and it's in the 9th inning, and the score is 0-0, and she says, "Good, I didn't miss anything." So anyway, so we're talking about the Great Mother was veiled by the animus the day that the great vision was unmasked, not as a vision from God, but as a vision from the devil and the animus together. We'll find that out later. That's both of them. Telling her to live a completely unfeminine life. You're just going to be you need to conceive the genius child, which will be our child, the child of you and me, the animus devil. It's going to be our child. And you're not going to have a husband other than me. And but you need, the only way it will be the genius child of both of us is for you to conceive it without any lust or any feelings. And then Emma Young tells her, well, that is screwball. That's totally animus opinions. There is not 1 ounce of feminine thinking in that at all. And you're a woman and you want to be a woman. And so this is your great vision. She's saying to her, she'll find out later. What she's really striving for is to be a normal woman, but she can't because of her negative father complex. And this is what's inhibiting her. But as the Great Mother tells her, you didn't, that she helped her out when she was living all this repressed life, that it's going to all come out all right, she says. She says, that the veil was thrown over me the day that the animus devil was unmasked as your tormentor, and he has power over me, over the Great Mother, only when I am veiled. So speak with me anyway. Here's the wonderful things, is the fact of not integrating the shadow is because you're not taking responsibility for your own life. Edward Edinger says that you really overcome your shadow when you stop blaming others. And that has something to do with surrender, or humility, one of the two. But the patient says, can the animus be educated? Why don't we educate you first, and he will follow? And then the patient says this. Now, this is the theme we're going to be dealing with through the whole 80 pages here. She says, I am an unmarried woman. I want to make up for my unlived life as a woman, And then what does the Great Mother say? All life is lived. Now, that is a very profound statement. All life is lived. Not just for Anna Marjula, but for us. She says, while you lived your neurosis, while you lived this life of panicking when men came around, of being tormented by your animus, of having this difficult relationship with your father, I lived the life that you were not living as your proxy. And so then you ask yourself, well, what is the role of the Great Mother? She's living my life, my unlived life for me. This is the whole idea of the fact that the rhizome or the rhizome will grow whether you're conscious of it or not. You know, the rhizome is also termed fate, but it is going to develop whether you're conscious of it or not. But if you fulfill it with an actively, and where the mind is aware and understands what it is, and surrenders to it and doesn't fight it, like we saw in that first picture with the roots being pulled down and then the branches being pulled up, you know. I mean, that's fighting the evolution. And then, you know, the ring with the chains pulling it an inch away rather than it radiating it out from within. That is what she's saying, is that the rhizome is going to develop. The great mother is the rhizome. She's nature. And
I'll just kick in a bit. So perhaps I think one of the turning points for me insofar as thinking, maybe my existence up until 2015 has been not necessarily properly balanced, and that I need to, continue into more of an exploration of the intuitive and the spiritual. And at that time, in about 2015, I encountered a professor of economics from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, I believe it is. And his name is Stephen Resnick. He's since passed away, sadly, because I actually reached out to try to contact him because I appreciated this tidbit that he shared. He's a professor of economics, and he's got on YouTube, you can see there must be 50 lectures on Marxist economic theory. There's not too many universities in the United States, probably in Canada either, that have courses in Marxist economic theory. Now, I'm not a Marxist, but I'm trying to think of, well, what's wrong with the world today, and who's this guy, Karl Marx? And anyway, one of the philosophers that Karl Marx was inspired by was a gentleman named George, let's see if I can get the name correct, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, if I've got that correct, but Hegel. Now, Hegel apparently is really hard to understand, but the one thing he said that really struck me was that Hegel apparently said that all of our lived lives, if we look back on every experience, good and bad, all of our encounters with other people and the sharing of knowledge and wisdom, and our trials and tribulations of even trying to figure out the opposite sex, he says that if we were all to step back and look at those unique lives that we've all lived, that they will point us to one singularity of truth, or to some sort of a singularity, from all of our different perspectives. And I just, felt compelled to share that, having heard what you said, that we are all these rhizomes, we're in different soils, we're having different predicaments or challenges, and we deal with our complexes over time. And as Jung says, when you get to, like, I'm almost 60, and now I can look back at all of my life and try to figure out, okay, what's it all pointing to? So anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what Schopenhauer says, that our, when we get near the end of our lives, it all seems like a beautifully composed novel. And all the things that seemed really horrible when they happened, they led to this and this and this. And none of that would have happened if we hadn't had that happen. And so, there is an aspect of the life unfolds kind of whether you like it or not. One of the interesting things about Hegel is, where Jung had the opposites, which is, basically, as far as you're concerned with active imagination, it's the ego and the collective unconscious that you have access to. And then, so that's thesis, antithesis. And then the transcendent function, which is the third, because the ego can never meet the self in its world, or the anima in its world, or the shadow in its world. But it can meet it in a third place. And that's the transcendent function, which is the symbol of meaning. And that would be synthesis. And, but it's, what Jung said about Hegel. He says, Hegel is a failed psychologist. I, Jung, am a failed philosopher. So he says that's what they shared. He says, I'm a philosopher who flunked out, and Hegel's a psychologist who flunked out. He was one of these guys that goes up to the door of meaning, but then doesn't knock, So anyway, we're just... so she's telling the Animus, can he be educated? The patient says, well, educate yourself first and he will follow. And then she says, I am an unmarried woman. Now, this is her great sorrow. And it is a great sorrow. And it's not something that you can take lightly. And it's, because they'll tell us later that, among her sins, she sinned against nature by not having a family and children, but there is another side to that too that will be the healing side. So let's not get too negative about that. Then she says, all life is lived. While you lived your neurosis, that I lived your life. And so then you ask, well, what's the role of the Great Mother? She is the soil. She is the rhizome that created you. She is the wisdom that created our bodies. She's the wisdom that is unfolding in the flower. In my active imaginations, I've been overwhelmed by that the Great Mother doesn't like how I start my active imaginations. So suddenly, like a film being speeded up real fast, I'm going down this road and I'm going down the road real fast. And then suddenly, where do I come out? I come out in a meadow filled with flowers and with her favorite animal, the bees, and she has I had this one active little thing. I've actually had two. One was where this beehive, I went in there and there's this beehive and it is just gushing with honey. And it's so explosive, the honey's just pouring out of it, that I have to leave the room and I wait and wait and never stops. And I'm thinking, what are we going to do with all this honey? It's kind of what the Great Mother says, but I had this dream that the bees who live in the desiccated rudeness are likened to the depths. Immerse yourself in them, so in other words, there's a rooted tree, and in the rooted tree, like a pool of water, are bees. And I'm supposed to baptize myself in the bees. And the bees are the Great Mother's favorite animal. What do you think about that? Anyway, she's, so what's the role of the Great Mother? This is the Great Mother's she's the rhizome. So I am evolving your rhizome within you, even though you don't know it, because I am the rhizome. I am the earth, So you feel as if you have missed your life, but your life was lived by me. Nothing can fall totally out of the psyche. She says, now that's another profound statement that's hard to understand. Nothing can fall out of the psyche. Everything that happens to us is part of the warp and woof. It's the part of the fabric of our life. It's not going to leave. It's all part of it. And now this is what the very interesting thing. And you pass over these things. She says, there is a treasure waiting for you when you are mature enough to get it. Okay, well, what is the treasure? Well, it's the fruits of the lived life. What is she says neurosis, and then she says another, neurosis is always smaller than that which is hidden behind it. Well, what's hidden behind it? What's hidden behind it is the lived life, so which the Great Mother said she's living in your absence as a proxy. And so you could not stand the hidden thing, the thing that was hidden behind your neurosis. And what is the hidden thing? It's lived life. It's and in her case, she's thinking it's relationship with men, and it's having children. But the Great Mother tells her later that those are the expressions of something. They're not the something in itself. So she's thinking the only way that she can fulfill herself is a relationship with the man, with her having a sexual life, and she doesn't really mention children that much. But what the Great Mother says, well, yeah, those are important, but they are expressions of something that is far more important. So you need to get in touch with what the sexuality and that are an expression are the expressions of, So I mean, this is very profound, I think. I mean, and she says, now another thing she says, your neurosis was strengthened by your courage. You're enduring it for years and years. And then she gives this kind of funny thing that think of it as a scale, and think of the courage and strength went on the passive scale. Okay, this is the unconscious, unlived life. All of her libido and energy. And she says later, I didn't lack any courage. I didn't lack any energy. I was a fabulous concert pianist, and I was very successful as a concert pianist. And so she's not lacking in courage and strength. What she's lacking in is being conscious of herself as the rhizome, of her unlived life, and then she says, think of it as the active scale, I don't know if you can see this, but the active scale goes up as, you put your libido on the passive scale. So at that point, and this kind of is something, I know you've heard of it, enantiodromia, where it means, it kind of means that, if you go too far in one way, opposites meet, opposites touch each other. If you go too far in one way, then suddenly you're going to come out in the opposite, way. So that's kind of what it's saying. Then she says, and I think the active scale is the extroverted and the conscious scale, which Anna Marjula is very unconscious. She is not conscious. She said, when the active scale rises, then you can seize the sum of your unlived life, the treasure, because, it has risen up here. And even though you're unconscious of it and unaware of it, I'm not sure I understand that yet. But I mean, that's kind of what she's saying, is that at some point, and I think she does outline this a little clearer going forward, but she says, nothing is lost. All of it is there. Everything is in that upper active scale. So nothing can fall out of the psyche. So all of it is there. And she says, take it bit by bit. Okay. And so the mature life, or getting her treasure, is taking it bit by bit. And, she says, and then she says, how can I be fulfilled without sexuality? And that's a very human question. You can say, well, what are you bringing that up for here? We're talking about God, and but it's a very human question, and she's asking it, and this is one thing that I think that we can learn from the individuation of women that an individuation of a man would not inform us about. Women tend to be a lot more grounded, and their feet are on the earth, and they ask practical questions that a man would not ever conceive of. And so what she says is, but how can I be fulfilled without sexuality?
One of the things I'll just chip in here is to quote Bono again of U2, and he said in an interview that there's an advantage that in English we are limited. We only typically use one word for love, and that is love, even though the Greeks had eros, philos, and agape. But he says, in a way, it works well because you can write songs about your love pursuit, your girlfriend, and women, and at the same time, those songs can also be construed as songs about God and the Creator.
Well, it's like Eskimos, got 100 words for different kinds of snow, I mean, there's different types of snow. I mean, you're living in this landscape of all it is snow. Well, you start to differentiate a little bit, where, in India, where there's this introverted feeling type. And, this is why Robert Johnson spent most of his time in India, is because it was his homeland. It was the homeland of the introverted feeling type. They have hundreds of words for love. There's the love of a mother for her daughter. There's the love of a mother for her son. There's the love of a wife for her husband. There's the love of a child for its parent. I mean, those are all have differentiating aspects to them. They're not the same love, and then there's the love for God. That's not the same as the love for the child or the love for the parent, I mean,
but what he's just saying, he is saying that, depending on how you frame or what state of mind you're in listening to a rock and roll song, it can also be very spiritual, even though they, on the surface always singing about his jilted love life or, his love loss. But from another angle, the same song can take on a much more, spiritual, profound meaning.
Yeah, well,
to the listener.
Yeah, any music is a bridge to the, to the muse. I mean, if it's really well done, I don't care what type of music it is. If it's done by an artist, whether it's classical or rock or country or bluegrass, if somebody is doing it from the deep center, it's beautiful, I mean,
and I like what you said about, there are all these different kinds of love, and for some languages have all these different words for various versions of love. And I was just thinking, wouldn't that be a fantastic poster to have? I forget what you should call it, but an infographic of all the different words and different colors.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and this is the same thing as the Eskimos having 1,000 words for snow. These very ancient introverted feeling types have these 1,000 different words for love because that's their focus, so they differentiate what love is. Ramakrishna had this woman come to him and he says, I must confess that I don't love God. I just don't feel it from my depths. And Ramakrishna asks her, well, what do you love? And she says, I love my little nephew. She says, that's your bridge to the inner world, is through that love for your nephew. But anyway, it is this. You see how rich the introverted world is. You know, I mean, the extroverted world, I mean, this is, you know, Emma Young was an introverted sensate. You know, oh, wait, we got another person coming in here. Just a second. Hi, Rui. I hope you weren't there very long. I was kind of, you know, rambling and blathering, so I wasn't checking out. But anyway,
Craig, I
yes.
just wanted to
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
add something that I have been thinking about for a long time, and that is that it seems to me that any emotional attachment can be used to access the divine. So, you know, in thinking about it in the most negative terms, I'm thinking, okay, what if an alcoholic really wanted to discover his divine aspect? It seems like if you follow the path of love and respect and just follow whatever it is that draws you in, it can lead you to the divine if you never fall off that path. So for instance, I don't have any addictive really qualities, so I'm not an expert in this regard, but it just occurs to me that if somebody like an alcoholic who was looking for spirit in the wrong place could just stop long enough to say, okay, I'm going to care for myself by not swallowing this. I'm just going to be in its presence. I'm going to respect its energy and be in the tension. Just stay in the tension. And it seems like if a person had the temerity to follow that through, you could eventually find the pathway to the divine.
Well, yeah, and that's living. You know, Jung said there were two paths to developing the rhizome, as I would say. You know, wholeness is basically, I think the one thing that you know Jung stressed is that, you know, you need to be a tree with leaves on both sides of it. You know, I mean, and there's one side of the tree that is the outer life, and then the other side of the tree is God within you. You know, and that you could live that life either through becoming conscious of the inner world, which is the introverted way. You know, where this introverted world filled with all these little nuances, you know, that we were kind of just discussing a second ago. Or the other way is the extroverted way of living life with utter devotion. You know, living life, throwing everything you have into it. And in both cases, I think it is that the work is more important, that the what of my life is more important than the who. You know, the fact that I'm a servant of the muse that's informing me. You know, if you know, you were whatever, music or art, or my wife is very much involved in being a grandmother and a mother, but also helping troubled women, you know, which she does all the time. I mean, you know, but the idea too is that the addict is seeking God. You know, I mean, he's seeking God. I mean, this is something I really learned. I hardly ever drank in my whole life. My brain can't handle it. But you know, I'm pretty well acquainted with AA, and you know, that has a Jungian connection. But you know, the letter that Jung wrote to Bill Wilson, you know, he says spiritus contra spiritum. You know, the spirit. You know, spirits are liquor or alcohol. The spirit conquers the spirits. You know, I mean, the only way that he knew, and he told, they were talking about a mutual friend, the only way he knew to conquer addiction was through love and through the spirit, you know. But anyway, that is
I just wanted to comment on.
Go ahead, Charles.
comment on what Tim said. I don't know if you've read Faust, Tim, but what you said made me think of the idea that, isn't it, of suffering through the 3 nights until you hear the Christmas music. And yeah, trying to suffer that tension long enough for, I guess, something from the unconscious to kind of break through into your awareness that kind of transcends your misery and suffering and basically gives you enough meaning to hopefully, break your addiction or your habit, or to change the way you live. And yeah, I don't know, it just made me think of that from Faust.
It's an epiphany, My wife and I were one time on this ferry going up Geiranger Fjord in Norway. My father comes from very near there, and it's just absolutely beautiful. I mean, these 1,000-foot mountains just, closing you in. My dad's cousin, it's actually my grandpa's cousin, told me one time that she says, "Jeg liker fjellene tett rundt meg." I like the mountains to be tight around me. But anyway, we were going down this fjord, and there's this couple, and this woman had obviously, the man had discovered that she had cheated on him. And he was furious. And the woman didn't know what to do, I mean, she was embarrassed and humiliated that she'd been caught. She didn't want to rupture her relationship with her possibly her husband or whatever. But all this way through this most beautiful place in the world, we're going up this serene fjord. We're sitting here watching this divine drama play out before us, okay? And suddenly, as we're turning, as this beautiful Norwegian ferries turn, they're so smooth, turns around the corner, and now we see the end of the fjord, which is the little town of Geiranger. Suddenly you hear the Julie Andrews of Norway. Her name's Sissel Kyrkjebø, and she starts singing this song that was at the Lillehammer Olympics. It's like, "Oh, Vestland, Vestland." I mean, Vestland is Norway's, is rocky fjord thing. Suddenly, the couple reconciled. It was one of the most beautiful things I ever saw in my life. But it was this epiphany. It's also kind of interesting that all night sea journeys are 3 days in the depths. I mean, Christ goes down 3. A night sea journey is everybody used to wonder what happens to the sun when it goes down into the ocean. Where does it go? I mean, nobody knew. Nobody knew what happened. They didn't know that the Earth was going around the sun, and that the Earth was revolving, making day and night. There was no one knew that. So they're wondering where the sun goes. Well, it was called the night sea journey, and it was, what's it doing? Where does it go, and how come it comes up over here? I mean, so but this was an analogy for a visit to the land. I mean, the only way that you can really, and you'll find out, I think we're going to find this with the Great Mother finally tells her. She says, there is no way that you're going to resolve this situation of your spiritual life and your earthly failings, your spiritual omissions and your earthly failings. The only way that you're going to resolve this is through humility, surrender, and what she calls fasting with the heart. What fasting with the heart was, this thing that Meister Eckhart says, which is really, you give up everything. so that you can listen to the voice. And, you know, boy, that voice spoke to Meister Eckhart. I mean, as far as being Jung had this affinity with him because of all of his original experiences that he experienced. But anyway, I mean, we'll just finish this great, there's a, you know, I was going to go through 6, but we'll just go through them as we can. But anyway, she says, how can I be fulfilled without sexuality? And the Great Mother says, well, you don't know where your departure point is. Your departure point or your starting point is not sexuality. Your departure point are the feelings that lead in that direction. You know, the feeling life that leads in that direction. That's what her unlived life was, of which sexuality is but an expression. So that's your starting point. Not, you don't go start out and you know, von Franz and Emma Jung say that often people are having this problem. The only way that they think they can cure it is through crude sexuality. But, you know, that just usually leads to more despair, you know, than before. I mean, sexuality without relationship, you know, you would call that crude sexuality. And that's not really what Anna Marjula wants. She thinks that's what she wants, but it's not what she wants. And she says, but she lost Anna says, I lost those feelings so long ago. See how honest she is? I lost those feelings so long ago. And she says, trade your courage, trade your energy, trade your libido for the lost feelings. You know, you have courage, you have energy, you've got libido, you're this, you know, very successful pianist. Trade that energy for these lost feelings. And she says, you keep mentioning courage, but I've never lacked courage. And then the Great Mother says, your courage is dangerous. The Animus plays with it. You know, I mean, she's in service to Animus, not in service to her, the Great Mother. You know, your courage is in service to the Animus possession. You're a passive martyr, you know, and this passive martyrdom is your compensation for your unlived life. It's also, she says later, it's a compensation for her. It's actually this tormenting by her animus devil within her is really her substitute for her lack of sexuality in her life. You know, so and then here again, this is very human. Anna says the animus is to blame, and the Great Mother says you are to blame. He says, you know, you were too far up. You need to stop hating your animus, and you need to stop hating your shadow. They've played with you only because you were unconscious. And then Anna says, I'm ashamed. And the Great Mother says, don't feel ashamed, feel responsible. You know, she says that the curing is activated not by passivity. It's cured by feeling responsible. So anyway, then we got about 10 more minutes. If you guys want to jump in, go ahead. But I just finish out with kind of what she sums up the active imagination with her analysts. This is her first one with the Great Mother. Remember, it came after her great vision got blown up in her face. And this is her first discussion with the Great Mother. And the analyst liked it and urged her to continue. She did so enthusiastically, but the animus loved his power, and he would keep telling her how things look bleak, all these efforts are ineffective, that they're injurious to her health. And so Anna and the animus are in battle. And in her conversations with the Great Mother that followed this, they were very pedestrian. It was just about her illness and her depression, her doubt and her disbelief and her despair, which were all just kind of hot air takes. And Emma Young kind of mentions something about this. She says it expresses itself what is largely a retrospectively oriented pondering over what we ought to have done differently in our life and how we ought to have done it, or as if under compulsion we make up a string of causal connections. We like to call this thinking, though on the contrary it is a form of strangely pointless and unproductive, a form that leads only to self-torture. Here too, again, is a characteristic failure to discriminate between what is real and what has been thought or imagined. And, this was James Hillman used to say this. And, this is one aspect of the Jungians. They're a little bit unsympathetic for the personalistic problems that you have, because they see the goal is not all your personal issues and your problems. It's the spiritual process of unfolding the rhizome, the unlived life. That's what the focus is, not on, although what we're going to find in here with Anna Marjula, since she was with a Freudian analyst, and the great mother will bring this up later, is that she can't break out of the personalistic problem. How can I be fulfilled without my sexuality? How can I be fulfilled without these very practical things which are incredibly important to me? I mean, you're bringing up all this airy-fairy stuff, but I can't accept that. I'm still have this inferiority because all of my women friends have men in their lives and I don't. Now, how do you solve that? And the great mother tells her later, well, you're not going to solve that. I mean, the way you solve it is you realize that life, it appears to not have been your destiny. It appears not to have been your rhizome. Your rhizome was to be a spiritual person. And that's what's going to happen as we go forward, is she's going to realize that she is has sort of is a conduit to the spiritual life. And then the great mother, as she's doing all these hot air takes, the great mother patiently replies that disbelief and doubt belong to her shadow. And we're going to meet her shadow pretty soon. And her shadow is, ooh la la. She's quite a extrovert, and she's very, she's a woman's woman too. I mean, it's kind of very, you can really see the authenticness of these active imaginations when we hear her voice. Yes.
I just wanted to, since we're kind of almost out of time, I just wanted to bring up something that I was curious about, and how, so we're talking about a woman that has a negative father complex and is tormented by her animus. And I was curious on what kind of the polar opposite of that, a man with a positive mother complex, what generally speaking is the relationship to the anima there. It seems like her animus is very negative, critical, tormenting, and I can't help but assume that like the male perspective, that's polar opposite, positive mother complex, I feel like the anima is almost a very teasing, misleading,
very deep,
kind of like a trickster in a way, but very like almost overly pleasant, overly.
That's the one problem with the anima, I think, versus the animus, is she's so fascinating, so she's so devious, she's a very neutral being. And if you're, again, the negative anima is, or if you're anima possessed, that isn't necessarily negative because it can feel positive. But Emma Young says that these possessions come about because of the fact that you are not putting your energy into developing your personal myth and your relationship. So remember the anima and the animus, and we'll find out later, the animus tries to tell Anna that he is part of the quaternity. He is in the up there with God and Christ. And the Great Mother tells him, well, he's inflated. See, the anima and the animus are the bridge. They are the like the persona, the mask that we use in the outer world is our bridge to the outer world. In other words, we don't go into the city square naked. We go in with our clothes on and with our social face, and we try, what is it they say? You've got one face in front of the people, one face in front of your family, and another face when you're all alone. The one that's in the outer world is sort of the bridge to the outer world. This is the one you use to develop social skills, to communicate with people. There are people who can completely finesse that, and I actually saw a woman who did that. It was actually an Indian woman, and I went there to it was from East India, and I went to a dinner with an East Indian woman and her husband and her family, and we all ate with what do they call those, tapas or something, where you eat with a kind of looks like a taco, but it's not. But after the dinner was over, I sit down on the couch, and she comes over and sits right next to me and puts her hand on my knee, and she says, "Craig, have you ever been in love?" No, how's that for unmasking the persona? She's really, getting to the point. But anyway, so then the anima and animus are the bridge to the inner world, Now, if you're not going to bridge the inner world, use them in their role, then suddenly they become these tormenting figures, who are just going wild, for instance, because they marry your shadow. So the anima is going to, since you're ignoring her and she wants a relationship with somebody, and by the way, she's real. Don't ever kid yourself. She's real. She's there. You'll find that out, if not in this world, the next one. That's your soul, and she's feminine, at least for most men. There's a spectrum. But anyway, if you're not realizing that it's your and her job to be a tree with leaves on both sides, she's going to marry your shadow. Remember that we're going to see pretty soon that thing where Anna falls off the tightrope and suddenly she sees her animus and shadow dancing together, because they're married. That's kind of, I think, what happens, Charles. And I am having a lot of problems with my anima. I'm still, I've not wrapped my head around this yet.
I feel like my anima is like a leader of many wild goose chases, and
yes,
it's mischievous.
Yeah, well, mine is kind of I would say, very deceiving, and sometimes the only time I'll ever see her is I'm in a room at night, and suddenly there'll be a flash of lightning, and I'll see her outside the window. She's standing there looking in through the window. And this very much reminds me of in the Puer Aeternus, in the Kingdom Without Space, the hero sees all these young children looking through his window all the time. I've had a couple dreams like that, but anyway, I'm still working on it. I've been out of analysis for maybe about a year and a half, and I started the active imaginations seriously every day, maybe about 6 months ago. So I'm making a little bit of progress, but I'm not there yet, you know. But anyway, so we'll just pick it up next time, unless anyone has any closing words of wisdom.
I just wanted to make another shout out to Nicholas. And
Yes, we love Nicholas.
Yeah,
I keep hoping that I'll see him in whatever room he's in. Like looks like the boiler room. You know, it's got all kinds.
It looks like some type of control
things to turn and stuff like that. But anyway, hopefully he'll be back sooner rather than later. So anyway, well, I'll see everybody next time at 10 a.m. And thank you so much for everybody for coming.
All right, thank you.
Okay,
thanks, guys. See you again.
See you guys later. Bye now. Bye, Miles.